"I'm no great guitarist technically," Leslie West said in a 1987 interview with Guitar World. "I only play with these two fingers, holding up the index and ring finger on his left hand." Now, I know as a kid growing up and learning the guitar in the 70s, I sure knew who Leslie West was, and it didn't make any difference if he was a technical guitar player or not. I just knew I loved his sound and playing, and I still do today. But many of my friends who didn't play guitar didn't pay much attention to him after the hit song Mississippi Queen left the airwaves. Why was that? Well, let's take a look back and maybe we can figure this out together. He was born Leslie Abel Weinstein, October 22, 1945 in New York. When he was 10 years old, his grandma took him down to see Jackie Gleason on stage. But for some reason that day, Gleason wasn't there, and the Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey stage show with their orchestra took his place. Now, Leslie wasn't too thrilled about that, as he wanted to see Jackie Gleason. And it wasn't until the Dorseys introduced their guest that he sat up and took notice. That guest was Elvis Presley, and that day, the guitar seed was planted. His father took off and left the family when Leslie was in the 5th grade, and his parents would end up divorcing. After the divorce, Leslie was to change his name from Weinstein to West. As a teen, him and his brother Larry formed a group called the Vagrants. They would copy a lot of Beatles and Rolling Stones songs. Now here's a clip of Leslie playing the guitar with the Vagrants at age 19. And this was lip-synced for some movie, but I thought the guitar he was playing was pretty cool looking. Someone told me it was a Dan Electro, but I'm not really sure. If anyone knows more about it, leave some info in the comments section. And one more guitar story from Leslie is his first bought, a 58 Sunburst Strat. Leslie told the story this way. "I got it with my bar mitzvah money," he laughed. "I started copying licks off records by some of my favorite players, Albert King and B.B. King and Eric Clapton. Then in 1964 came the Vagrants, the band my brother and I formed. We built a good reputation around the area, but you know what happened with that Strat? When the Vagrants started, we all wanted new guitars. So I traded for, get this, a Kent, a red Kent with 3 pickups. It was really disgusting, man." Leslie's brother Larry, who was the bass player in the Vagrants, told him they needed to go hear the group Cream, who was produced by Felix Pappalardi, who had also produced a couple of songs for the Vagrants. So they went to the Village Theater, which was later to be called the Fillmore East, to hear him. Leslie said they did some LSD, and when the curtain came up and the show started, he pretty much got a mind-blowing experience. He turned to his brother and said, "Man, we suck. Why don't we sound like Cream?" Larry said, "Because we don't practice enough." So Leslie says after hearing Cream, he realized that they did suck. And he said this is when he really started to get down to work on his playing and singing. But the Vagrants just couldn't get things going any further. They tried recording some more songs, but just really wasn't prepared for it. Leslie says that they just couldn't get on tape in the studio what they were live. So it was time for Leslie to move on. He started putting a new group together. He had an organ player who played the bass pedals and a drummer. They played a few gigs early in 1969, opening for Jethro Tull and Jeff Beck and a few others. They had some good material worked up, so Leslie called Felix Pappalardi, and Felix said, "Great, let's record it." Well, it seems the recording didn't go too well. The drummer wasn't good enough, and Felix just shut it down. Now this really got to Leslie. He had practiced and really worked hard for this session, but he wasn't one to give up easily. He said he conned Felix into playing bass on his album. When asked how he conned him, he said, "There's never been a fat and a skinny guy on stage. We can't miss." Now I was terrified, but he bought it, hook, line, and sinker. This does sound like a Leslie West story. And if you ever listened to or read any of his interviews, you know Leslie was a real character when telling a story. If it's true or not, It's anybody's guess. But either way, the recording got underway. The album, titled Mountain, was recorded and released in July of 1969. Felix Pappalardi played bass and organ, and N.D. Smart took over on drums. After the recording session, they brought on Steve Knight to play organ and started playing out. They played a couple of gigs and then went on to take the stage at Woodstock. How they got on the bill at Woodstock, Leslie says, Jimi Hendrix's agent was our agent. Jimmy was like the unofficial headliner of Woodstock. So, the agent must have said, if you want Hendrix, you have to take this other group, Mountain. They paid us $5,000, and we did get paid. We went on Saturday night, but they lost our film, so we weren't in the movie. But what Leslie heard, and most believe is true, is the manager wouldn't sign off on the bands appearing in the film. Leslie went on to say, he probably didn't get enough money. Another stupid move we made. In September of that year, they brought in Corky Laing to play drums and went on to record 3 more albums, Climbing in 1970, In Nantucket Sleigh Ride, and Flowers of Evil in 1971, with Climbing and Nantucket Sleigh Ride both going gold, but the band was to break up in early 1972. If you listen to them 4 albums in order, you can really hear Leslie's guitar playing, his tone, and his style evolve. In them 3 short years, from 1969 through 1971, he went from a really good guitarist to a great one. I think this had a lot to do with finding the right tone to fit his riffs he heard in his head. So I did a little looking around and found some interviews, and this is how this kind of all came about, including how he ended up with that Les Paul Jr. First off, how the Les Paul Jr. got into his hands. Now, we know Leslie listened to Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix a lot. He said, I never heard anybody play the guitar like they did. Now, you have to take into consideration this was at a time when Leslie was still into R&B and Delta blues some. By now, Eric and especially Jimmy were really becoming the innovators to this new sound. So a friend of Leslie's named Waddy Wachtel, that name should ring a bell with some of you. Well, he lived in the same building as Leslie. Leslie said, he taught me how to play real guitar. I lived on one side of the building and he lived on the other. It was in Forest Hill Plaza, a brand new high-rise. I'd hear a Beatles song come on the radio, and I'd go down to the elevator and take it up to his house. And by the time I got to his house, he already knew the song, and he'd teach it to me. Now, Waddy had bought himself a George Harrison model Rickenbacker 12-string. So he sold me his Les Paul Jr., and that's how I started playing that guitar. I got it from Waddy. Now, to get the sound and tone, he said, to make up for my lack of speed, I added in a lot of vibrato from the blues guys. I worked on my squeals and pig grunts, as he called them, referring to the octave harmonic screams he used on many riffs and solos. And Leslie said, you gotta have the Les Paul Jr. to do 'em right. Because of the single pickup, the way the string can bend down when you hit 'em. If there was a neck pickup, it'd be in the way. Without it, you have all the room you need. And his tone back then came from 2 Sun stacks with a Coliseum PA head. He said they were Jimi Hendrix old amps, retolexed and reconed. Those PA heads had 4 inputs and a master volume, which started the distortion thing on me. I'd turn the mic volume all the way up and then bring the master way up and overdrive the thing like crazy. You know, when you listen to these guys talk about tone and how they got these great sounds back then on dinosaur equipment, it's pretty cool. From what I read, this was the same amps that Leslie used in the studio on the early albums. Now, of course, as time moved on, the equipment changed, but by then Leslie has established himself and his sound. You know, I don't expect this video to get many views except mostly from the players. Leslie West was not a household name that the average rock fan knows. It doesn't carry as much weight as, say, a Hendrix, a Clapton, or a Page. I'm sure some of you have a different opinion, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section. Mountain didn't stay together long, about 3 years. They did a lot of touring during that time and did a lot of drugs. And bass player-producer Felix Pappalardi said he had to quit because of a hearing issue. Leslie said it was because he had to go in the hospital for drug rehab. But either way, Leslie and Corky Laing decided to keep going on. So Leslie decided to call up one of his idols, and him and Corky forged a new alliance with ex-Cream bassist Jack Bruce. This group's debut album, Why Don't Ya?, appeared in 1972, followed a year later with Whatever Turns You On. The West Bruce and Laing trio proved short-lived though, dissolving prior to the 1974 release of the Live and Kickin' concert set. Now Leslie and Laing continued to work together occasionally after the trio breakup, but I think Leslie was a little burned out by then. We worked about 285 jobs a year, one-nighters, he said. It was killing, man. Really stupid. I didn't enjoy myself, got too concerned with being famous, and got into drugs. And so it was that he found himself in Milwaukee in 1977 shedding some bad drug habits. I stopped playing, didn't even want any guitars around. West did retire from music for a time, then cleaned up, and again reformed Mountain with Corky Laing on drums and bassist Mark Clark. Felix Pappalardi had been shot and killed by his wife Gail in 1983. She shot him with a Derringer he gave her. She only got 4 years in jail. She said it was an accident. Leslie said it was a load of shit. Leslie West has played and recorded with some of the best there ever was, from jamming with Hendrix to recording with The Who, for which he received a platinum record that hung on his wall. When it comes to his peers, he was always looked up to. There are some out there who consider Mountain a one-hit wonder with the song Mississippi Queen. And maybe by the numbers, I guess you could say that's true. Drummer Corky Laing had the hook, and he came to Leslie's apartment in Manhattan. He says, "Look, I have this lyric, Mississippi Queen." He said when he was in Nantucket playing this little bar and the power went out, he was just playing drums and shouting the words, "Mississippi Queen, do you know what I mean?" And he's watching this girl dance, and he just kept repeating it over and over. So Leslie started fooling around with the guitar riff and came up with the music hook. After that, they went real quick into the studio, and Felix told Corky to count it off, and he counted it off with a cowbell, and that sounded good, so we left it in there. The only thing Leslie never liked about the recording was the piano in it. He said, "I hated it." The Climbing album went gold, and the following album, Nantucket Sleigh Ride, did the same. But as far as hit songs, the radio back then didn't push any of Mountain's songs very hard after Mississippi Queen. For myself, I wore the grooves out of Leslie West's first 4 albums. And I know I didn't get very far into Leslie West's life. There was just so much to talk about him. This might be one I need to do a follow-up video on sometime in the future. I just always felt he never got the commercial success that he deserved back in the 70s. Maybe it was bad management, or maybe the songs just weren't radio-friendly enough. I do know that many musicians look up to him and have a lot of respect for his playing. How about you? Leave a comment and let's hear your thoughts. Hope you enjoyed this little look back on Leslie West. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you'd take the time to hit the like button and subscribe on your way out. Maybe stick around and watch another video or two. But I gotta run. Thank y'all for watching.